Nintendo's next game console is on the horizon. We know it'll be announced by March at the absolute latest, so naturally, a lot of people are speculating about what sort of big games we could see for the system early on, and unsurprisingly, one of the games people are expecting the most is a brand new 3D Mario platformer, since after all, it's one of Nintendo's signature franchises. I mean, Mario is literally Nintendo's mascot, and it's been almost 7 years since we've gotten one. Of course, people all over the internet are speculating about what this game could be like, and I see a lot of talk about the possibility of it being open world, meaning it would feature a single seamless map for the player to explore in almost any order. I think a lot of people see this as the logical next step for the franchise, since Super Mario Odyssey, and later the side mode Bowser's Fury, put much more of a focus on exploration than any 3D Mario games before them. Now, I want to say that I am a huge 3D Mario fan. For my whole childhood, I lost sleep over every new game in the series. I'd get each one the day it came out and finish the entire game in a weekend. I even spent literal thousands of hours speedrunning Mario Odyssey. I live and breathe 3D Mario, and I truly believe open world Mario would be the ultimate Mario game, and literally revolutionize the gaming industry. But I see a lot of mixed opinions about the idea online, from both die-hard fans and casual players. And while many of these just boil down to a matter of preference, which is totally valid, like just not really liking exploration in games, I also think a lot of them have completely the wrong idea about what open world Mario would even look like, and are based on all sorts of faulty assumptions. Welcome everyone, I'm Grady, and today I want to delve into what these wrong assumptions are, why I think people have them, and what I think open world Mario would actually be like, and how it could work extremely well, despite what many of these people have to say. So, of course, being a massive 3D Mario fanboy, I, along with my friend Bronze Space Comet, who's also a massive 3D Mario fanboy, were absolutely foaming at the mouth to see what an open world Mario game could look like. But it's not like either of us have artistic skills, so, of course, we did what any sane person would do, and spent hours and hours feeding prompts to AI image generators to try to get any sort of glimpse at a concept for the game. It didn't really work. We got some cool looking stuff out of it, but nothing that really matched what we were envisioning. They just didn't really look like a Mario game. I think this is partly because AI struggles with generating scenes that have a lot of detail, but I think it goes beyond that too. After all, these image generators are trained using data. The AI looks at a bunch of images of open world games, and it uses that to form an internal idea of what open world games look like. So this internal idea ends up being heavily based on what existing open world games look like, rather than taking the term open world at face value. All that's required for a game to be open world is for it to fit the definition of open world, but the AI interjects its own ideas about what open world means. So the images we get end up looking more like existing open world games, but with a Mario skin, rather than really looking like an open world Mario game. Here's the thing though, AI is modeled after human intelligence, and I think humans have a lot more in common with AI than we sometimes think. I think humans often do the exact same thing the AI is doing here without even realizing. Like, look at this fan art. Now, don't get me wrong, this is some gorgeous artwork, but I don't think it really reflects what open world Mario would actually look like. It doesn't really look like a platformer. It looks more like Zelda Breath of the Wild, but with Mario elements. I wouldn't be surprised if you had a similar image in your head of open world Mario too. Here's another one. Also a really impressive piece of fan art, and I love the art style, but this type of gameplay and setting isn't really characteristic of Mario games. It's not unheard of to have an area in a Mario game that looks like this. I mean, look at the starting area of Wooded Kingdom in Mario Odyssey, for example. But it's certainly not what the majority of the terrain in that game looks like. I think another thing that might be shaping people's conceptions of an open world Mario game is the depiction of the Mushroom Kingdom in the Super Mario Bros. Movie. It's Mario, and it's big, so perhaps people think, Surely an open world Mario game would look something like that, right? Even though it doesn't actually look like a Mario game at all, since again, it doesn't really seem conducive to platforming. So, what are the specific assumptions people have about open world Mario that are wrong? Here's some comments I found around the internet, mostly from Reddit, that I think aptly demonstrate what these assumptions are. No, open world is the cancer that is killing gaming. It decimates core video game fundamentals such as stage design by removing stages and replacing them with empty space. I don't see how this would work. Mario is built around platforming, and you don't want to be traipsing for ages going from one challenge to the next. The more open the world, the more filler. Mario should spend as much time jumping as he does running. I'm not big on the idea personally. Mario needs intricacy, which I feel like a massive open world wouldn't offer. I feel that making such large worlds really detracts a lot of attention from other important areas, such as content variety and the level of polish. People are too obsessed with open world games these days. Bigger does not equal better, people. Mario is about good level design, interesting obstacles, and platforming. Making a massive world is just going to lead to repetitive environments and flat terrain for Mario to run and triple jump through. Personally, I've had enough open world games. Most open worlds are empty and padded to hell with travel and pointless repetitive missions. Please, God, no! I am sick of open worlds! Most of them are just big, pretty-looking empty spaces with copy-pasted content dotted around. Overly open-world games really aren't good and usually end up being lazy. Do you see the pattern? All these people are either saying they don't want to play a game that's empty and repetitive, or that open-world Mario wouldn't work because platformers need to not be empty and repetitive. Okay, sure, I'm cherry-picking a bit, because I did see some comments that showed a genuine dislike of exploration in Mario games, but I'm not cherry-picking that much. I'll even leave the links to these threads in the description so you can see for yourself. A lot of people seem to be operating under the assumption that open-world games necessarily have to be empty and repetitive. A growing number of people are becoming fed up with open-world games, and I don't blame them. Even the most beloved ones, like Breath of the Wild, are frequently criticized for being too empty, and having most of the same things copy-pasted all across the map. But there's no rule that says open-world games have to be like this. Why couldn't there be an open-world game that's super dense and full of nooks and crannies to explore, with each aspect of the world deliberately handcrafted, rather than using procedural generation and copy-pasted structures? Okay, I know what you're thinking. Developers of open-world games don't want to make their games empty and repetitive, but it's a necessary compromise for building such a massive world without taking an absolutely absurd amount of development time. I hear you, and some of those Reddit comments touch on this too. You might even say that these games need to be massive, otherwise it wouldn't take that long for the player to just cross the entire world, and there wouldn't be a sense of genuine adventure in trekking across it. And I do agree that the sense of journeying across the world is a really good thing to have in an open world game in order to have a strong feeling of progression, but I think a platformer game is a unique case, because in a platformer game, the main challenge of the game is traversal. In a platformer, it takes much longer to cover swaths of land, since it often involves navigating through a literal obstacle course. And a lot of the time you have to take some sort of detour to get where you want to go, because there's a huge pit or a giant unclimbable wall in your way. Because of this, the world wouldn't need to be anywhere near as big as, say, Hyrule from Breath of the Wild, because you wouldn't be able to just run or climb to your destination in a relatively straight line. The challenge of traversal would make your destination feel far away, without actually being that far away. And since the game would be way denser than something like Breath of the Wild, you'd also get distracted by a million things along your way, which would slow you down even more. I mean, think about how big some of the kingdoms in Super Mario Odyssey feel. They don't feel massive, but some of them feel pretty big. Now, think about how tiny the same amount of space would feel in Breath of the Wild. I mean, there are literal hills in that game that are bigger than certain entire kingdoms in Odyssey. And okay, even if you make an open world Mario game far denser than other open world games and have it be filled with all sorts of hazards, it's probably still not going to take as long to get around its world as it does to get around Hyrule. But I think that's okay, because games like Breath of the Wild are meant to be more of a slow-paced and contemplative experience, while Mario has always been about delivering more rapid-fire action and surprising the player around every corner. I still think an open-world Mario game would be long enough to feel fulfilling. I mean, Breath of the Wild takes the average player a whopping 50 hours to complete and has around 200 hours of content total. I mean, some people even consider it too long. So even if open world Mario only took 20 hours to beat and had 80 total hours of content, that's still plenty considering how jam-packed the experience would be, and that all the content would be unique. And I don't think these numbers are unrealistic at all when compared to the numbers for Mario Odyssey. And all this is without even considering that they've been working on the next 3D Mario for 7 years. So who knows, it could be even bigger. Now, even with this open world format, it doesn't mean there can't be any linear challenges. I do think having some linear gameplay is pretty important for the game to feel like it has any structure. And I think another assumption people often have is that open world Mario wouldn't have any of this sort of structure because you'd just be able to run around wherever you wanted. But it's not like an open world game can't have linear sections integrated into the world. Mario Odyssey already does this, obviously with its main story quests, but also with some side things like the 8-bit sections and various other mini-challenges scattered around the kingdoms. Bowser's Fury does it too, with most of its islands serving as linear levels. You can also put linear sections into a subworld like Odyssey often does, but I actually think an open-world Mario game might want to use this idea more sparingly. If many of these sections could be integrated into the overworld instead, it would actually increase the size of the world by a lot, since some of these subworlds end up being surprisingly large. So to sum it up, imagine taking all the kingdoms from Mario Odyssey and most of the subworlds, and combining it all into one seamless map. That's what I think open world Mario would really look like. Full of all sorts of crazy structures and moving contraptions and unique challenges. Not just Breath of the Wild, but with mushrooms and Goombas. By the way, if you made it this far, I take it you're really enjoying the video, and I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed if you want to see more videos about Nintendo, and, of course, the upcoming open-world 3D Mario game. Anyway, back to the video. Okay, I take it you're probably yelling at your screen by now, but what about Bowser's Fury? What do you mean people are imagining open-world Mario the wrong way? It already exists. Well, that might be true, but somehow it doesn't seem like it gets brought up in these discussions as much as you might think it should. A lot of people still seem to be basing their mental image of open-world Mario more on open-world games from other franchises than on Bowser's Fury, and I think there are a few reasons for this. First of all, I'm not even convinced Bowser's Fury is relevant enough for it to have much of an impact on the equation. Although it sold a very respectable 13 million copies, it only did so as a side mode in a bundle where 3D World was the main game. So a sizable chunk of those 13 million people probably never even tried it. I'll give a generous estimate and say that maybe 10 million people played the game. That's still a lot, but Super Mario Odyssey sold almost 30 million copies, and Breath of the Wild sold another 30 million, in addition to having a huge impact on gaming culture. Since I'd wager Breath of the Wild has significant overlap with the Odyssey player base, it's probably more likely than Bowser's Fury to be what Mario fans immediately think of when they think open world, even when talking about the idea of an open world Mario game. It's also possible that Bowser's Fury isn't even big enough for some people to really consider it an open world game. Lake Lapcat is certainly bigger than the largest kingdom in Odyssey, but not by any huge margin. Or maybe it's that Bowser's Fury isn't even open world enough for some people to think of it as open world. I mean, you have to unlock each relatively small region one by one, so there isn't really any equivalent moment to leaping off the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild, or even to leaving the Shrine of Resurrection, where you feel a sudden overwhelming sense of freedom to go anywhere. Instead, it feels more like unlocking areas one by one in a more classic 3D Mario game, but they just all happen to exist on the same map. I don't personally think this disqualifies it from being an open world game, but I can understand the sentiment, and in my opinion, a full-size open world Mario game should seek to be more like Breath of the Wild in terms of how you can tackle the regions in any order you want. I'll delve more into how I think this could work later on, but even with this out of the way, let's consider the people who are using Bowser's Fury as their mental blueprint for open world Mario. I think there are more people than you might expect who actually think Bowser's Fury more aptly demonstrates why open world Mario wouldn't work. Why do I think this? Well, let me tell you about this app called Yodel. Okay, no, it's not what it looks like. This is not a sponsorship segment. I promise it's relevant. Yodel is this app where you can make anonymous posts and only other people nearby will be able to see them. In most cities, it's basically dead, except for like a few lonely dudes yelling into the void. But a bunch of people used it where I used to live. So, because I'm totally not obsessed with the concept of open world Mario, and because Yodel lets you create polls, I decided to do a bit of market research. Why on Yodel of all places? Well, I kind of wanted to get answers from people who weren't super dedicated Nintendo fans. It's certainly not 100% unbiased, but it's a lot less biased than making a poll on a Nintendo forum, which was basically my only other option. I did get asked if my uncle works at Nintendo, though. Anyway, I already showed you this poll where I asked people if they wanted the next game to be open world, and after I saw how abysmal the results were, I wanted to dig a bit deeper into why, so I made a part 2. And I don't think I would have ever guessed that playing Bowser's Fury made people less likely to want the next 3D Mario to be open world. Now, I'm aware there could be a lot of potential explanations for this result, like maybe people who play Bowser's Fury are more likely to be longtime Mario fans, and longtime Mario fans just want more of what they're used to, rather than some dramatic shift to the formula. But I do think there's some truth to the idea that maybe Bowser's Fury isn't actually a very good demonstration of the potential merits of open world Mario. Now don't get me wrong, I love Bowser's Fury, and I'm willing to look past its shortcomings because I was just so happy to finally be able to play a Mario game with a single seamless interconnected world. However, I think there's a core structural flaw with Bowser's Fury that might be leading some people to think it was a mistake to try to put everything into this one world. There's a great video essay by AurumAlex titled, "Should Bowser's Fury Really Be the Future of 3D Mario?" that touches on this in more detail, and I'll leave a link to that in the description if you're interested, but I'll sum it up. Bowser's Fury attempts to combine the free-roaming nature of Mario Odyssey with the way older 3D Mario games handled level objectives. In older 3D Mario games, you'd collect a star or shine from the level, and then you'd be booted back out to a hub world. Once you re-enter the level, it would be reconfigured a bit, and there would be a new objective. The problem is that Bowser's Fury is a game with one continuous world, so the developers wanted the player to be able to look around after completing one of these objectives and freely choose where to go next from there, rather than being kicked back to the start of the level. Because of this, the level doesn't reconfigure itself and give you the next objective unless you manually leave the area and come back. And I think this probably leads some people to believe that the solution to this problem is to go back to each level being an individual world, since it worked more seamlessly. But this isn't a problem with the game being open world, it's a problem with the implementation. Although Mario Odyssey is an open world, it managed to handle the problem of sequential story objectives just fine. In Odyssey, collecting a story-related moon spawns the next one immediately, unless it's one of the branching paths where you can get multiple moons in any order. And then you just keep continuing on from where you already are. Now to be fair, multi-moons work more like the collectibles in classic 3D Mario games, by booting you back to the starting area, so I suppose that wouldn't work as well in an open world game, but Odyssey at least shows that it's possible to have a sequence of objectives that doesn't require being booted out of the level or needing to leave the area and come back. My guess at why the progression in Bowser's Fury is handled in this really strange way is that the developers didn't feel like the islands were large enough to have a continuous chain of story objectives, because with the way Odyssey does it, It often involves having this long route that winds throughout the kingdom, but a full-size open-world Mario game wouldn't have this issue, since the levels could be much larger, more like the kingdoms in Odyssey. As one more side note about Bowser's Fury, I also think a lot of people weren't big on the whole Fury mechanic, myself included. While I liked it in concept, in practice it often just felt like it interrupted exploration. Like if I was playing a level where there was literally nowhere to hide, so I had to go retreat to somewhere safe. Or if I felt obligated to drop whatever I was doing and go find some Fury blocks to break before Bowser went away. However, I think it's obvious to most people that this mechanic was just an experiment, and that these problems wouldn't carry over into a full-scale open-world Mario game. Okay, so now that I've gone over why open-world Mario wouldn't be worse, why would it be better? What advantages would it have over just making another game in the vein of Mario Odyssey, or even Mario Galaxy? This might feel like I'm stating the obvious, but I think one of the main advantages of the open world format is freedom of choice. But it's not as simple as just being able to do things in any order. After all, a game doesn't need to be open world to give you freedom in the order in which you tackle objectives. Super Mario 64 is decidedly not open world, but after you get your first few stars, you can pretty much choose what levels to play at will. But I don't think this really feels as gratifying. I mean, suppose you were playing a video game, and I asked you if you'd rather play level 1, level 2, or level 3. You don't really have much information to make a choice with, do you? Now, suppose I gave those levels names instead. Suddenly you might feel more of a sense of agency when making your choice, cause maybe you think a fortress sounds cooler than a mountain. Now, if I show you pictures of each level, that's even better. The more information I give you about each level, as long as I don't spoil the whole surprise, the more gratifying it feels to make your choice, because now you actually feel a sense of intrigue. So now imagine if you could physically see the levels off in the distance. Imagine looking around the world until you see something that grabs your attention. Something that just makes you think, ooh, that looks fun. I want a platform on that. Or, oh my god, what is that? I think this is a lot more engaging than just seeing a picture or an oversimplified diorama of a level. It would even serve to build anticipation as you approached whatever you had your sights set on, and had to navigate past other obstacles. And speaking of which, an open world format also gives you more freedom in how you approach challenges. I don't just mean that figuratively, I literally mean the way you approach them. If you want to get somewhere, you'll have to think through which side to come at it from, and how to navigate past the obstacles in your way. Another possible advantage of an open world is allowing different areas to feel more interconnected. Mario Odyssey already did a good job of making its kingdoms feel interconnected, with stuff like the warp paintings, hint arts, and other quests that take place across multiple kingdoms. But an open world game could take this to the next level. There could be quests that require you to find things across different areas, or even figure out how to bring items from one place to another, sort of like the Lost Kitten quests in Bowser's Fury. Or there could be something like a foot race from one region to another, similar to the Koopa races in Mario 64 and Odyssey, but maybe taking place across wide swaths of the map. Now there's one more big advantage of open world that I want to touch on, and it's something that might seem a bit trivial, but I think it's pretty important. Open world games just feel grand and awe-inspiring in a way that other games don't. There really is no feeling like stepping out of the Shrine of Resurrection in Breath of the Wild and seeing such a vast world waiting for you. As you make your way across the world for the first time, you feel a unique sense of freedom and awe. It makes you feel very powerful and very small at the same time. Even though an open world Mario game wouldn't be as massive as Breath of the Wild, I still think it would feel a lot more impactful than something where you just go from stage to stage, like Mario Odyssey. Because of this, I think an open world Mario game would have much more of a cultural impact than any other possible 3D Mario game Nintendo might make, especially if it directly addresses many of the gripes people have with the current state of open world gaming. In terms of impact and influence, this game could be the next Breath of the Wild. Again, Mario is literally Nintendo's mascot. An open world Mario game that perfects the formula would take the world by storm. Just as Breath of the Wild was revolutionary in its way of providing the player with a sense of freedom, open world Mario could take those lessons and refine the formula even more by eliminating repetition, which is something even Breath of the Wild, and perhaps even more so its sequel Tears of the Kingdom, are frequently criticized for. I talked at length earlier about what open world Mario wouldn't look like, so now I think it's time to delve deeper into how this game could actually play out. I'll describe it the way I envision it. Of course, an actual open world Mario game might end up looking very different from this, but this is how I would design it if I were in charge. First of all, I think it's natural that the world will be divided into many different regions, maybe like 10 to 15 of them. I'll call them kingdoms like Odyssey does, since lately Nintendo seems to be leaning into the whole idea of various different kingdoms, with the Mario movie and Mario Wonder both referencing it. I also think this is a good reminder that the game wouldn't all just be generic Mushroom Kingdom theming, and that these kingdoms would be just as creative and diverse as the ones in Odyssey. And also, just like in Odyssey, these kingdoms would be dense and full of crazy terrain and platforming challenges, not sparse like the regions from most other open world games. Even though I've been saying the terrain in an open world Mario game would be much denser and crazier than the terrain in other open world games, I still think there's some room for variation on these fronts. Some areas will naturally be sparser than others, even if they're not as sparse as Breath of the Wild, like how Sand Kingdom is more desolate than Metro Kingdom, and some areas will look more naturalistic than others, like how certain areas in Wooded Kingdom look like an actual forest, while many other places in the game just look like crazy obstacle courses. Some areas will look more vertical, while others will be more horizontal. Similarly to Odyssey, variation will go a long way toward making each area feel memorable. I sort of envision most of the kingdoms having a central area where most of the main story quest for that kingdom takes place, or at least where it begins, and then the surrounding area near the kingdom's border would be mostly filled with optional, more minor platforming challenges and collectibles, as well as often posing an additional challenge to traverse in order to get to the start of the official story path. Of course, the main story path would also have plenty of optional distractions along the way. I imagine the game would start with a dedicated tutorial kingdom that you wouldn't be able to leave until you finish its main story. Basically this game's version of the Great Plateau from Breath of the Wild. Once you completed that kingdom, you'd be set free and you'd be able to go almost anywhere else in the game, but perhaps the game would give you some suggestion of where to head first, like Breath of the Wild does. From there, as you approached any of the game's other kingdoms, there would be a lot of things hinting at where to go to initiate that kingdom's main story. Perhaps there would be an obvious, important-looking landmark to go towards. Maybe it could have a guiding beam of light, like in Odyssey. And there could be various NPCs telling you about whatever threat is plaguing the kingdom, and where you should go to help out. Maybe also, once you get close enough to the main area of the kingdom, a cutscene plays to show you your first objective. Each time you grabbed a story-related collectible, a cutscene would play showing you where to go for the next one, and you'd continue on from where you currently are, no getting booted back to the starting area. Sometimes there might be missions where you can get multiple collectibles in any order, like there are in some of Odyssey's kingdoms. The end goal of the game would be to unlock and beat a dedicated final kingdom, you know, Bowser's Kingdom or something like that. The player would probably be made well aware of it starting from early on. Maybe they'd be told about it during or at the end of the tutorial kingdom. But I also just think it would look so imposing in the distance that it would be impossible to ignore. Imagine it like the Hyrule Castle of this game. Unlike Hyrule Castle, I think Breath of the Wild's whole idea that you can go beat the game whenever you want, but it's dangerous if you're underprepared. Although it's a really cool idea, would be much harder to fit into a Mario game, since Mario games don't really involve leveling up or getting stronger in combat. So I imagine Bowser's Kingdom in this game would probably just be something you need to unlock with collectibles. I think the best way to handle this would be to have it shrouded in some sort of fog that prevents access until you've gained enough collectibles. The required collectible count can be shown over top the region on the map screen, and maybe also visually apparent in the world with some sort of holographic text. Once the player got enough collectibles to unlock it, a cutscene would play to show the fog lifting. This would allow approaching Bowser's Kingdom from any direction, just like all the other kingdoms, in contrast to having some sort of gateway in one place that you need to open or something like that. I think the game would also benefit from having a few other kingdoms that are unlocked by a collectible count throughout the game, rather than just the final one, because I think this would enforce a more overarching sense of progression that wouldn't really be there if you could just easily go anywhere at any time. I said earlier that I didn't think the way of unlocking areas one by one in Bowser's Fury was really conducive to the open world feeling, so this is sort of a middle ground approach. After you beat the tutorial, you'd be able to go to most of the other kingdoms immediately, maybe like 2/3 of them, but a few of the more challenging and perhaps more interesting ones would remain locked until you got a certain number of collectibles. Notice that unlike in Super Mario Odyssey, these kingdoms will be unlocked based on your global collectible count, rather than requiring collectibles from a specific kingdom. Obviously, this makes sense since it would be an open-world game, and there wouldn't really be a current kingdom to require moons from like there is in Odyssey. But it also solves the issue from Odyssey, where some players felt disincentivized to get any more moons in a particular kingdom once they'd gotten the required number to leave. But I think there was a reason for Odyssey forcing the player to get collectibles in the current kingdom rather than any kingdom. And that's because there are just so many moons that the player could just explore the hell out of only 2 or 3 kingdoms and then have enough moons to beat the game. You could argue this freedom isn't inherently a bad thing, but I understand the developers wanting players to actually see the many different kingdoms and experience more of the main story objectives. Personally, I do think it's important for the player to actually have incentive to explore all across the map and experience the story, rather than just racking up collectibles in one area. So I think there are a few ways to solve this. Perhaps the most straightforward approach would be to award the player with a more significant collectible after finishing the entire story in any kingdom, similar to Grand Stars from Super Mario Galaxy or Royal Seeds from Super Mario Bros. Wonder. This way, you could have kingdom unlocks, including Bowser's Kingdom, require both a certain amount of regular collectibles and a certain amount of grand collectibles. For example, Bowser's Kingdom could unlock once the player acquired 150 regular collectibles and 10 grand collectibles. This approach would mean the player is required to visit a certain number of different kingdoms and actually complete their story quests. If the developers instead wanted to take an approach that strongly incentivized the player to seek out different story quests without making it strictly required, maybe the story collectibles could be worth bundles of regular collectibles. Odyssey tried this with its multi-moons, but I don't think the numbers were nearly enough. Multi-moons, which were like the final objective of a story path, were only worth 3 moons, and all the stops along the way only awarded a single moon. In a game where you can find a single moon just from busting open a random box, these are paltry numbers. For the open world Mario game, I would suggest something more like a bundle of 10 collectibles for finishing a kingdom story, and 5 for each stop along the way. There's one final potential way to incentivize the player to seek out the main story quests, but it might be more controversial. What if completing the story in a kingdom awarded the player with a new ability or upgrade of some sort? Perhaps it could be a way to activate the kingdom's signature power-up anywhere, or, you know, whatever this game's equivalent of power-ups is. Or a way to upgrade the specs of Mario's movement companion in this game. Think something like being able to throw Cappy farther, or spin more times in midair, or unlock a new nozzle for Flood. Or maybe it's more along the lines of unlocking a new move, kind of like the badges in Mario Wonder. Personally, I don't think this is actually the route Nintendo would take, and even if they did, I'm still not sure how they do it in a way that still works well in a Mario game, since generally Mario games avoid movement upgrades like this. But I thought I'd throw it out there, and we did see the badge system in Mario Wonder, so I guess it's not completely out of the question. So I hope I was able to give you an idea of what an open world Mario game could look like, but do I think the next 3D Mario game will actually be open world? It's honestly hard to say, but I certainly hope so. I have noticed that Nintendo seems to be listening more to their fans lately, for example, with them sending out a survey about the character designs in the Paper Mario series, after fans complained about those designs being stale. This is generally a good thing, but in this case, I actually hope they don't listen too much to the fans, because I don't think they should take all these negative comments about the open world format at face value. I think instead, They should just do what they've always done best, and use their own judgment to make the best game they can, which I very much believe would be open world. Again, I do think it feels like the logical next step for the franchise, and I guess that once these people actually see a trailer for an open world Mario game, any false presumptions they had about why it wouldn't work will be thrown out the window. I know that the people on the 3D Mario team are absolute masters of game design, so I have zero doubt that they'd be able to execute the concept well enough to fly in the face of what so many people dislike about the current state of open world games. As for why they haven't already made an open world Mario game if it's such a good idea, well, originally, I don't think it was actually possible with the hardware. Super Mario Sunshine almost seems like the developers wanted to make it open world but couldn't due to technical limitations, since you can actually see other levels off in the distance. After that, we know that for a while Nintendo was trying to appeal to a more casual soccer mom audience, with systems like the Wii and Wii U, and they made more linear Mario games as a result. But I think there are more people nowadays who are seriously into gaming, and I think the Switch is very much a product of this, with elaborate games like Breath of the Wild selling tens of millions of copies. Maybe with Mario Odyssey, they thought it would be too much of a risk to go full open world with both Mario and Zelda at the same time, but they still ended up making a game that was more explorative than any Mario game that came before it. Or perhaps the Switch still didn't have the power to run a game with so many intricate details all on the same map, since after all, open world Mario would be much denser than open world Zelda is. But hey, with a more powerful Nintendo system on the horizon, that I'm sure would have the power to run such a game, I think we might be in for a real treat. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Before we go, I want to give a big shout out to all the cool people in my Discord server for all the conversations we had that led to the creation of this video, especially Bronze Space Comet, who I've probably talked to for literal dozens of hours about open world Mario, and he even offered to proofread my entire script and give me feedback. I hope all you watching enjoyed the video just as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!